Welcome everyone to episode 4 of A Chef's Journey through Alexander Valley. We're so excited to have Jess Lander as our guest moderator. She will be leading today's episode, and as always, we encourage you to ask any questions you may have in the Q&A section. We have a great group of panelists who are happy to answer them as we go. We will also be sharing the recipes from the wonderful and talented Chef Jean Pierre at the end of the episode. So now I'm going to go ahead and introduce Jess and let her take it away. Jess Lander has been working as a professional wine, booze, food, and travel writer for 4 years. She is based in Napa Valley, and her work has appeared in several publications, including Decanter, Wine Enthusiast, Napa, Sonoma Magazine, Wine Business Monthly, and many more. You can follow her indulgences on Instagram at willwrite4wine. Without further ado, take it away, Jess.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of A Chef's Journey through Alexander Valley. I'm excited to get to talk about the wine that this region is known for, Cabernet Sauvignon. Cabernet is the most widely grown varietal in the Alexander Valley. The appellation is the warmest in Sonoma County, making it a premier growing region for Cabernet. The summer days are hot and dry, and many of the Cabernet vines are planted at higher elevations, which gives the grapes great exposure to the sun. But you also have early morning fog and breezes coming from both the Russian River and the Sonoma coast, which creates a long and slow ripening of the grapes, resulting in well-balanced, age-worthy, and wines with great acidity. Before we get started, I want to take a minute to introduce everyone. First, we have Chef Jean Pierre Moullé, who was the executive chef at the renowned Chez Panisse in Berkeley, California. Born and raised in France, where he completed his culinary training, Jean Pierre moved to the US in the early 1970s. He spent 30 years with Chez Panisse, and since retiring in 2013, he and his wife Denise split their time between France and California. Next, we have Lisa Mattson and Dana Grande from Jordan Winery and Vineyards in Healdsburg. Lisa has been at Jordan for 11 years as the Director of Marketing and Communications. She has more than 20 years of wine industry experience under her belt, doing everything from event planning to PR and marketing and creative strategy. Dana is Jordan's Grower Relations Manager. She works closely with the winery's grape growers and winemaker to ensure that grapes are grown to Jordan's quality standards. Dana previously served as vineyard manager at Jordan, leaving after 13 harvests to work for another family winery, and she returned to Jordan this year in this newly created role. Also here with us is our other Lisa today, Lisa Mazzoni, the general manager and 4th generation owner at Zialena Winery in Geyserville. Before officially joining the family business in 2013, Lisa spent 20 years working in the hospitality and management consulting industries. In addition to as company president, she focuses on creating guest experiences that best showcase the wine and her family's rich history in Alexander Valley. Finally, we have our grower speaker, Brett Munselle. Brett was born and raised on his family's ranch in Alexander Valley, and today as Muncell Vineyards, they farm approximately 600 acres in the AVA. In 2006, his family started a small production wine label, also called Muncell Vineyards, which produces Cabernet, Zinfandel, and Sauvignon Blanc. Brett is on the board of the Sonoma County Wine Grape Commission and is the past president of the Alexander Valley Wine Growers. So let's dig in. Chef Jean Pierre, we'd love to hear first about the dishes you prepared to go with these wines.
Hello everyone. Today, well, speaking about Cabernet Sauvignon and Sonoma Valley, I mean, the region, Sonoma region, I prepared a duck breast, which is grilled and with potatoes cooked in duck fat. That dish is pretty much a classic French, mostly Bordeaux, because as you know, Bordeaux, we grow also Cabernet Sauvignon. So, and also since I spent a little time in California, a little time in France, you know, it's just for me, it's easy to do wine pairing. Of course, there's many other dishes to go with Cabernet Sauvignon, but I also, this one is really a classic. The other one I do often because a lot of people like fish. You know, I do a fish with a red wine sauce, which also, you know, people will tell you that fish doesn't go with red wine, but actually, you know, it goes, the combination is really, really fantastic. So if you have not tried that, you should. And also, which is not today, but there's again many dishes to go with Cabernet Sauvignon, even some desserts. So.
I know, really good.
Great. And did you choose these dishes specifically for one of the wines, or for each wine, or just in general, you think they're great pairing for Cabernet?
I mean, I'm sorry, for Jordan Winery, yeah, that the duck breast works really well, you know, because the duck breast actually it is cooked like a steak. I mean, you know, I mean, I'm going to show you, you know, it's not, you know, it's a pretty big piece of meat, and on the grill, it's really fantastic. And actually, in Bordeaux, we also use a grapevine, you know, to cook that on, and the flavor, it's fantastic with the you know, everything. It's a terroir. I mean, you know, you use the grapevine for the vine around you. You use the duck. Here in Sonoma, we have not only we have vineyard, but we have a lot of farms. You know, we have a lot of people who does beautiful things, vegetable. Duck, you know, that duck come from Petaluma, from a really good friend, you know, Jim, and so, and many more people are raising lamb, poultry, rabbit, pig. So we are blessed to live, you know, in that area, because let me tell you, I mean, it's sometimes better than in France. I should not say that.
Oh.
Big statement.
Very.
You mentioned that Cabernets compare very well with desserts too. Do you have any suggestions for people on what kind of desserts they could pair it with?
What? I'm sorry. Another dish, or I didn't.
You mentioned that Cabernet can go really well with dessert as well. Do you have some recommendations on those dishes that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like at that time of the year, I do a lot of fig dishes, and baked fig, actually, you would be surprised, will go well with red wine. I mean, it just, and same thing for poached pear. And the poached pear, if either you poach them in a syrup or in red wine, it's absolutely a magic combination for the wine.
Do any of you other panelists have a favorite Cabernet pairing that might not be the traditional red meat or steak?
I like wild mushroom risotto. I like to pair it with risotto.
Yeah, Dana loves wild mushroom risotto with Cabernet. Our chef here at Jordan, Chef Todd Knoll, he also has a seared tuna that has a little bit of Israeli influence with the spices that actually is paired with Cabernet in the past with a tuna steak as well. So it was really interesting.
Braised short rib is my favorite. Oh, there you go.
What about you, Brett? Got any suggestions?
Doesn't Cabernet go with everything? I mean, you can have it with any dinner that we have in our house.
There you go. Chef, we have a question for you. Someone would like to know how our Sonoma Cabernet compares with Bordeaux.
That's a tricky question, you know, because I have to tell you, I spend more time of my life in California than in France. So I moved here when I was 24. I started at Chez when I was 24. So of course I go back to France every year, and also I am my wife is from a wine family, so that makes a little things complicated, but. It's not the same Cabernet, because here you have a little more heat and a little more sun. So the alcohol is a little it's a bigger Cabernet in California than in Bordeaux. Now on the other hand, the Bordeaux Cabernet is really a little more tannic and takes, you know, like 10 years, 20 years to age and to be ready to drink. So I don't know if I answered that question, but they are both Cabernet Sauvignon, but they are different.
Great, thank you. I just want to remind our viewers that they can find these recipes on the website at alexandervalley.org. And we also have a request to share some of your other recipes, so maybe we can get that up on the website as well. Now, Lisa Mattson, I'd love for you to tell us about the wine that you guys are presenting today.
So yes, we have the 2016 Jordan Cabernet Sauvignon, and Dana's glass is hiding off camera, so we both got a little bit to sip here today. But we're very excited about this vintage because it is our 40th anniversary vintage of Cabernet Sauvignon. So we made our first vintage back in 1976, and the Jordans came to this valley, fell in love with this valley because Mrs. Jordan likes to say that the mountains hugged the valley, and she loved that about it. And they thought that Napa Valley was already too crowded back then, and thought that they knew that they wanted to make a Cabernet Sauvignon as an homage to the great wines of Bordeaux, because that's where they fell in love with wine, and food was traveling in France. They loved Bordeaux. That was their favorite wine. So that Jordan has always been an homage to that. And we've been doing that now for more than 40 years. Dana's been here for several of those vintages. And this was a great, Dana could tell you a little bit about 2016. It was a really great vintage.
It was a beautiful growing season. You know, we didn't have a lot of rain, but the rain that came, vast majority of it came in the early part of the spring, late winter. So the vines had a lot of water to start out with. Everything was pretty mild, no frost, even bloom time, really even ripening, and no real heat spikes, no real cool downs. It was a cooler year. It was cooler than many, but as a general rule, it was just one of those really nice even years from start to finish.
Yeah, and what that led to in the wine is that we had a real concentration of the blackberry and dark fruit flavors, thanks to the Mazzoni family and the Muncell family. You've got Cabernet. This is 80% Cabernet, fair amount of that coming from the Mazzoni ranches, and then it's 11% Merlot. Pretty sure that's all thanks to Brett Munselle, his Milk Barn vineyard. And then there's 7% Petit Verdot in this wine from our estate here in Alexander Valley in the southwest corner rather. And then also we have a little bit of Malbec also from our ranch. And this wine is also our second vintage that is aged entirely in French oak. When the Jordans started out, they wanted it to be that homage to France. So it was 50% French and 50% American oak, since they are from the Midwest and had moved out here and was making the wine in California. But we have since moved to all French oak in 2015. And why did we do that? The reason was when we really started working with more of our growers, like the Mazzonis and the Muncells out in the Alexander Valley. It's just the beautiful tannin structure that they have in their benchland and hillside vineyards. It just was so pretty that Rob Davis, who was our first winemaker who just retired last year, now Maggie Cruz is his protege, this is her 15th vintage she's taken over for him. Rob just said, we really don't need that American oak to mask this fruit. It's so beautiful. And so that's why we've made the move to go all in on all French. So, and it is a lower alcohol for, California standards, about 13.8. But this is the Jordan style, balanced, elegance, emphasis on the fruit and the acidity, not on the tannin and the alcohol. Also, I smell without my mask. So, yeah. What did you think, Jean Pierre?
Yeah, no, you were, I was curious about your, if you had Merlot, because I tasted, Merlot in it. It's called, it's a Bordeaux blend, actually, but sometimes, like, you know that, Saint-Emilion, you have more Merlot than Cabernet, but I think the addition of Merlot and Petit Verdot in the Cabernet helps a lot, and make you could, the question before was, comparing both Cabernet, This one could be, yeah, a French Cabernet. I mean, because it's, as you say, it's soft and it's not, you know, it's not that alcoholic and yeah, it's well done. Good job. That's my daughter said that. Good job.
Sorry, I lost you for a minute. I'm not sure if you went over this, but Dana, can you tell us kind of about working with small growers and this just really familial aspect within the winemaking community?
Yeah, I mean, I think in Alexander Valley, we're all neighbors and we're all kind of one community. These are our people, you know? And so what's nice about it is, you know, my job is as someone who's supposed to source fruit is to pick the right site for what we're trying to do, and then pick the right grower who owns that site, right? And I'm really, really lucky that I kind of walked into good site selection and really fantastic growers. So I have been blessed. They've been teaching me a lot about their sites this year. And I look forward to continuing to work with them. I'm super excited about the Cabernet from this vintage. I think we're going to have a really nice one. And I think it's important too, with as much consolidation has been going on in the wine industry, you know, wineries our size are fewer and farther between. And I think that relationship aspect of you know, people working together might be getting a little bit lost, if you will, in the industry overall. And I think it's something that's critically important to me. I know it's critically important to John Jordan, and it's the way we live, you know. It's about the relationships. It's about, you know, helping one another out and bucking each other up when we need it. So I think that I think it's critically important, and I think, you know, I look forward to the continuation of it all.
Great. I know that this wine sourced from more than 60 vineyard blocks from the Jordan estate and growers. So can you tell people how you guys ferment these lots, like individually, and how they come together in the final blend?
Yeah, so all of those 60 lots would be analyzed and tested and sampled and tasted on an individual basis. When we make pick decisions, they're based on individual blocks. So when they come in, we hold them separately as much as possible. Sometimes if the flavors are really, really similar, we will combine blocks under one owner, but generally speaking, you don't combine different vineyards together. They're all fermented separately. They're all then aged for a while separately until Maggie decides what the master blend is going to be, and then she puts them all together. Then they go undergo further aging in oak, and then bottling 18 months later, roughly 18 months, 2 years?
Bottle more than 2 years. 24 months.
24 months. It's been a while since I was here before. Don't have all my talking points down yet.
We extended the bottle age.
Oh, okay, good. So anyhow, so yes, everything is kept separate until we blend it all together.
Great. And I want to talk about ageability, because Alexander Valley wines, you know, really have this ability to go the distance. Lisa, can you touch on that? I know you guys even have a tasting experience at Jordan where people get to taste multiple vintages of this Cabernet to see how it evolves over time.
Yes, it's interesting to think that when the Jordans came up with the idea of the style of wine they wanted to make at Jordan that was more Bordeaux, back at a time when the few wines in California that were red, because most of them were white in the 1960s and early 70s, the few reds were very tannic and they didn't like that style. And so Tom Jordan just said, I just want a wine that you can drink immediately. He was never thinking about how this wine could age. And what we've seen with Jordan, and I think it's true in many Cabernets in Alexander Valley, or most if not all, is when you make a wine of balance. When a wine like this with these beautiful natural tannins that Alexander Valley Cabernet is a hallmark for the style of wine, and you protect and preserve that acidity and pick those grapes sooner rather than later, you know, just at the right time, not letting that Cabernet fruit hang on the vine for such a long time, like it has been a trend in the last, you know, couple of decades in California. If you pick them at the right time, they hold that acidity. I mean, these wines can age so beautifully when you make them in that balanced style. And so, you know, we have people that open even, you know, the big bottles from the 70s still taste amazing. The 750s, you know, every now and then you get one that it's like, oh, it's, you know, they are past their prime. But I opened a 1980 last year, and it was beautiful. I opened the same wine a year before. That was amazing. I think 80 is one of the great vintages of Alexander Valley in terms of just a long, long life. And so because we only make the two wines, the Cabernet Sauvignon in the Bordeaux tradition and a Chardonnay in the Burgundy tradition, it's important when guests do come here, they are going to taste older wines. So we do offer what we call a library tasting. We refer to all of our old wines as library wines. And we'll let people, like right now, when you come to Jordan, you're tasting back to 2010. So you know, we don't have, unfortunately, the wines left to taste people back to the 70s and 80s on a daily basis. But John does make the investment every year of every vintage, holding back a certain amount to keep in the library so that, you know, 10 years after that vintage, we can feature that wine every day. For tasting at Jordan. And so 2010, I think, is a really interesting vintage to be opening right now. It was a cool climate year. And it's just very French in style because you didn't get that heat like Jean Pierre was talking about that year. And there's just beautiful dried herb notes in the wine, beautiful fruit. Oh, 2009 is tasting great right now too. That's Maggie's probably favorite from the previous decade is 2009. It's really, really beautiful right now.
Great. And let's see, we have a couple questions for you guys. Of the 60 blocks, how many make it into the final wine, or are there 60 blocks total in the final blend?
Not necessarily. What we'll do is you taste and evaluate multiple times before you make up that master blend, that final blend. And to be honest, the ones that don't quite make the grade don't get into the final blend. So not always. I think that what I would say is in the last several years, I'm going to guess that more and more make it into the final blend as we've better refined our site selection for our style of wine. But not always does everybody make it in.
Great.
They get lots of chances to audition though.
Yeah, here you go. And then how can our viewers acquire the Jordan Cabernet?
So a few different ways. Of course, we do sell it on our website at jordanwinery.com in the shop. We also are available, since many of the restaurants around the country are still, either closed or at limited capacity. We're known as a restaurant wine, and we were actually named voted the best Cabernet Sauvignon on American wine lists this year by Wine and Spirits magazine. And we found out the week of the pandemic that started in March. So that was a little disappointing, but we're still very honored to have that accolade. And so while the restaurants aren't ordering, more people are buying at retail. You can find Jordan at many wine shops. And if you go to jordanwinery.com, you'll see a little thing called the Wine Finder at the top. And you can tap on that, type in your zip code, and it'll let you know that's updated every day with new information. And it lets you know who in your area has Jordan as well if you decide that you don't want to purchase it directly and have it shipped in. For us, it doesn't matter either way. We're just happy for people to be able to enjoy a bottle of Jordan with some beautiful food.
Great. And we touched on the pandemic and how everything's changed and evolving, the last 6 months. This is a question that I think any of the speakers could answer. What are your thoughts on the current market of Cabernet?
Do you mean the market as in the restaurant market, or what market? Or the grape grower market?
It wasn't specified, but I think there are statistics that show Cabernet has become a growing market, definitely over the last 5 years or so. Have you guys noticed that it's getting more popular? Have you seen it change at all during the last 6 months?
People still want to drink. I think people want to drink even more. So we haven't seen, I mean, yes, there's a little bit of a change in demand because of where the wine is available, but we haven't seen any sort of difference. I mean, I've heard that people are drinking less sparkling wine because they don't feel like celebrating as much, which is a shame. But I think with Cabernet, we find people still drinking reds even in the summer, and now we're moving into fall and people will be feeling like it's red wine weather even more so now.
Great. I'd love to move on to our other Lisa M. Lisa Mazzoni, can you talk to us about the wine that you're presenting today?
I'd love to, and thank you. I'm joining you today from our tasting room in Alexander Valley, and we are also featuring the 2016 Cabernet, and that was on purpose. But before I kind of talk about the wine itself and maybe compare and contrast a little bit about what you just heard from Jordan, I'd like to spend just a minute kind of giving a background to our vineyard and our winery. I will start with the name, Zialena. Zia is the Italian word for aunt, and Lena was my grandfather's oldest sister. So my brother Mark, who maybe you were expecting to see, is our winemaker and co-owner, but he is harvesting today. So I am filling in for him. But Mark and I are the fourth generation here in Alexander Valley. Our great-grandfather immigrated from Italy in 1897, leaving behind his daughter Lena, who our winery is named for, and his wife for 5 years before they could join him here. My grandfather and grandmother built a house on the site where we are now in 1931. So we've actually been growing Cabernet grapes here on this property since 1931. It started out as about a 30-acre vineyard. We're now at 120 acres. And in 2011, Mark and I decided to move forward the family business with this label, Zialena. So just a little brief history of kind of who we are and where we are in the valley. So the 2016 Cabernet, a lot of similarities in terms of winemaking style, lower alcohol, 14.9% on this one. We also use 100% French oak for all the reasons that were described. We just feel like those barrels provide a better complement to the grape itself. My brother will tell you what he's looking for in his winemaking style is actually being able to taste the fruit. And then, you know, lots of layers of flavor and texture is very important. So the combination of his concrete fermentation, we have a concrete fermenters that we use, and that French oak provides kind of the layers and structure and texture that you get in this wine. A difference that I'll point out is that we actually use 100% Cabernet. There's no blending in this. Not that to say that he wouldn't, he just has never felt that he has. We pull all the grapes for this wine off of the block right behind where my grandparents' house was. The Jordans and Dana will know it as block 3, but we affectionately call it Grandpa's block, because that's the part of the property that we've been growing grapes on the longest, and we just have a very emotional attachment to it. So out of our 120 acres, we have about 80 acres of Zinfandel, of Cabernet, and we're using a very small portion of it for our wines here. So for example, this particular wine, we made just under 600 cases. The rest of our cab, as you may have picked up on when Lisa and Dana were talking, the rest of our Cabernet grapes go across the valley to Jordan, and our grapes have been featured in their wine for nearly 30 years. So we have a long history and relationship with growing really great cab to produce both of these wines, which are beautiful.
Great. I'd love to hear from you guys that are tasting both of these, what you think the biggest differences are between these two wines, since they are the same vintage and, you know, AVA.
What do you think, Jean Pierre, since you're trying them both side by side?
Yeah, I did. I mean, it's they are different. I mean, and the Jordan has more the Bordeaux style, and but I like the for me, the other one, has a lot of vanilla flavor. I mean, you know, I don't know if it's a barrel or but it's they're both beautiful wine. I mean, you know, and again, ready to drink, which you know, like for a Bordeaux, that would be. I opened a 16 last night of Bordeaux wine, and too young, you know, you have to wait. So that's nice to be able to drink 2016 now, because they are ready, and as you say, I mean, they're going to have probably a long life, because they have the bone and the support to age well.
Lisa, I'm curious about the concretes. That's not something you see a lot in California. You know, what was the reason for choosing to use that, and what do you think it imparts on the wine? I'm definitely picking up a mineral note here, so.
Yeah, great. Thanks for asking. And actually 2016 was the first vintage that we had our winery facility here on site, and with the concrete fermenters. Mark chose concrete for a couple of reasons. One is because it's a porous material, so when we're doing that initial fermentation, we're getting a lot more oxygen into that wine, which kind of helps with the extraction of tannins. The second reason is that it's much easier to control the heating and the cooling of the wine. So even though we do have the ability to manipulate the temperature, a lot of times we don't have to. It just sort of naturally keeps that wine at a really even temperature during that initial fermentation. I will also say they look really cool. So when you walk into our winery, you're greeted by this panel of kind of 10 concrete tanks that make a real statement. It's a really neat display, but there is reason behind it for the winemaking. And yes, since this was the first vintage through that concrete, the mineral flavors do come out a little bit stronger, kind of like a cast iron skillet. It gets seasoned over time, and so now that minerality has kind of toned down a little bit in the subsequent vintages.
Great, I love that analogy with the cast iron skillet. And your family has obviously a very long, rich history in this valley. So can you kind of tell us how you would define like a classic Anderson Valley Cabernet?
So I do think that, you know, I won't compare it to France, as I am not an expert there. But if I just compare it to our neighbors to the east in Napa, I do think it has to do with, in the introduction when we talked about the cooling effect of the fog. The fog reaches us, you know, with enough hours in the morning that we get a nice even ripening. And I think what that leads to in the wine is sort of a layering of flavors and a really, again, sort of being able to taste the fruit. So when we have the oak impart on it, it's a nicely integrated flavor as opposed to being able to taste, you know, a lot of oak on top of, you know, that feeling of tannin, etc. I'd be curious though what Lisa or Brett think, because they both are used to tasting both of those wines as well.
I just think there's an elegance to Alexander Valley Cabernet that I don't find anywhere else in California. There's this lovely silkiness to the tannins that I think is really lovely, and that just the acidity and tannin structure with the fruit. I think it's just very, very elegant. I mean, I know you can make a powerful Alexander Valley Cab if you want, but there's still this elegance underlying to the Cabernets of Alexander Valley, in my opinion.
I guess if I was to add to that, I think our county, Sonoma County, has, you know, evolved. The California wine industry is very young. Someone asked earlier about why are Cabernets becoming more popular, and I think a big part of that is we've really learned where we can grow Cabernet as a county. And if you're growing Cabernet in Sonoma County, you're coming to Alexander Valley. So we have a geographically very long valley that climatically is 10 to 15 degrees different from one end to the other. So you have a broad spectrum of area of temperature range and styles. If you want to be a Jordan and creating more of a Bordeaux style Cabernet with that elegance. There's an area for you to look for that fruit. And if you want to be like I would say with our own wines, or even with Zialenas, you know, going for a little bit bolder, not having the Merlot added into it, you can get and make that style of wine in Alexander Valley. And a lot of that is just, we've had time to really figure out where you can grow the best Cabernets in Sonoma County, down to Alexander Valley, and where in Alexander Valley you can do that. So I think with that, you're seeing consumers that are starting to really reap the rewards of 50, 60 years of really honing in our skills on where you can grow these Cabernets.
Okay. We do have one question, and this might be good for you, Brett, is what conditions produce a Cabernet that can last for decades?
You know, I would probably say that's a winemaker's question, but I think you need Cabernets that have a strong backbone, which you got to have a great tannin structure to do that. And I think if you're growing that in too cool of a region, you lose some of that. And if it's too warm, you burn out some of that backbone. We're kind of lucky that really with the two wineries we're talking to today and the grapes that we grow, we are in the dead center of Alexander Valley. So we've got, and from my perspective, like the perfect climate to make a Cabernet that has enough structure, enough tannins, enough backbone to age for a long time. We started making our wines in 2006, and that's still today my favorite of our Cabernets. I think part of that, you get emotionally attached to your firsts, but it is, it definitely has the structure to last for a long, long time. And I would expect with both the wines you guys are tasting today that 20, 30, 40 years, you're going to be enjoying those wines. They're built to last, as well as to be drank, you know, 3 to 4 years from the time they're bottled.
Great. And Lisa, where can our viewers get this wine?
Yeah, so we actually are not distributed, so everything is direct from the winery, given our size. So you can go onto our website, zialena.com, and purchase it there. But once we can, we would love to have you out at the vineyard. That's the best way to buy.
Absolutely. And are you doing outdoor tastings at the moment?
We are doing outdoor tastings by reservation. We, fortunately, with the size of our vineyards, we have lots and lots of space to spread out. So we are open for tastings.
Awesome. Okay, and Brett, I know your family's been farming in Alexander Valley for a very long time, over 130 years. So what else can you tell us that we haven't covered today about growing cab in Alexander Valley?
Yeah, so thank you. It's nice to be with you guys today. So my family we've been farming in Alexander Valley since the 1870s. We've grown pretty much everything that you can grow in Alexander Valley over that time, starting with vineyards and winery. Two of my great-great-grandfathers both had wineries in the central part of Alexander Valley. Both of those wineries closed in the early 1900s for different reasons. Since that time, we've always grown grapes. Most of those have been grown up in the hills. Our family had prunes, then dairy, grew tomatoes and watermelons. We've had apples and peaches. In the late 60s and early 70s, we went back to 100% wine grape growing. So for my entire life, we've been all wine grapes. But when I was young, we had 100 acres of Pinot Noir. Today in Alexander Valley, you'll only find one block of Pinot Noir. It's just too warm of a region for Pinots. And that's a little bit what I was talking about. We've started as growers and as a young wine industry. I mean, we certainly aren't France. You know, we don't have thousands of years. We've got 100 years in our experience, but we've started to really learn where we can grow these different varieties. And Alexander Valley, we're lucky to say, is like the best place in Sonoma County to be growing high-end Cabernets. So our family grows roughly 300 acres of our own fruit and farms approximately 400 acres for clients. So we grow a lot of Cabernet, Merlot for Jordan. We farm for the Mazzoni family. we were on their property day picking Zinfandel for their own winery, which I think Lisa said Mark is crushing right now as we speak. So our whole history, our whole business is based in Alexander Valley. I love to talk about Alexander Valley. I love to talk about the Cabernets that we can produce here. Currently, we grow about 50% of all of our acres is Cabernet. And then we do have Sauvignon Blancs, Merlots, Zinfandels, Chardonnays, some Petit Verdot, Cab Francs. The blenders that go in those Bordeaux style cabs, we grow all of those as well. To talk a little bit about Alexander Valley specifically, Alexander Valley is a 22-mile long valley. At its widest point, it's somewhere between 4 to 5 miles wide. The wines that you're tasting today are all grown right in the dead center of that valley, between the Alexander Valley Bridge and the Geyserville Bridge. I know Jordan has some blocks that are probably outside of that stretch just slightly, but the majority of the 50, 60 lots that go into their bottle, they're in that area. Alexander Valley can be 10 to 15 degrees cooler from one, or warmer from one end to the other. So down near Chalk Hill, you can be, mid 80s on the same day. We're up in Pine Mountain at the very northern tip of Alexander Valley. It could be close to 100. So you've got a big climate zone, temperature range. That gives lots of opportunities for wineries to work with the types of Cabernets they want to work with. If they are wanting a higher alcohol wine, they can head more north of the center of Alexander Valley. And if they want a lower alcohol, longer ripening season style of cab, you can tend towards the south to get a little bit cooler. The soils, we have a valley that's made up by the Russian River. So you've got the valley floor is all the Yola loams, river loams. So that's where you tend to find a lot of your Chardonnays and Sauvignon Blancs. As you move into the first bench, which is where almost all of the Zialena or Mazzoni family grapes are, you get a lot of that deep, rich soil, but it's all sediment coming off of the hills. And as you move into the hills, then you have a whole wide range of soil structures, but they're very thin soils. So you've got much more devigorated vines up in the hills, and up in the hills of Alexander Valley, it's all Bordeaux style grapes. So it's all Cabs, Merlots, Cab Francs. So that's kind of a little bit about, the structure of Alexander Valley and why I think that we can grow a bunch of different styles of Cabernets. And I feel like we're so lucky to have that length, that type of climate range. And then with regard to, someone brought it up, I mean, it was Dana, talking about working with growers. So 30 years ago, we grew grapes and we sold white or we sold red. Today, we grow grapes and we sell and work with relationships. So what we do on the Mazzoni property for Jordan is slightly different than what we do on the Mazzoni property for Mark. At the end of the day, most of our farming there is very similar between the two, but the harvest date is different. Mark tends to pick, a few days to a week later than Jordan wants to pick theirs. And that's stylistically what they're both looking for. So as a grower in Alexander Valley, we really are, we're working on relationships. I work with Dana at Jordan. I mean, this time of year, we might talk once or twice a day for a month, I feel like. With Mark, I see him every day this time of year. And during the whole growing season, we pretty much talk weekly about what we're working on. So for me, that's one of the best parts about the industry is that we have these great relationships, friendships. Dana Grande is my kid's 4-H leader. You really do have these relationships, and relationships are what gives you the opportunity to build great wines, right? You can tailor what you're doing because you're working with them so often. So that's a little bit about us, and that's Alexander Valley and how and why I think we're making some great Cabernets today. I'm totally open to any questions, though, if you have for me.
Yeah, we do have one question that came in asking about how long a vine can produce grapes, and that might also be a good opportunity to talk about different ages of vines that we have in the valley.
So grapevines can go nearly forever. We have some Zinfandel vines on the second of our family properties that are right around 130 years old. We have a picture of my great-great-grandfather with a horse and plow in that field. So those vines aren't very economic. They still produce, and they're very historic for our family. It's great to go and we make a small amount of wine from them. It's great to stop and talk about them. But economically speaking, they're not very economic. They're just historic for our family. Typically in Alexander Valley, Cabernet vines have about a 25-year life, and that really is caused from eutypa, which is a wood-borne disease that eventually will kill the vine. There's lots of things to manage that, but there's a point where you are no longer economic. You're not producing enough tons per acre to make it work, or it's not functional. You're not getting enough fruit to supply the wineries that you're supplying. So really at 20 years is when we start reevaluating each block. And for the most part, I mean, we do have 2 Cabernet vineyards that are like between 30 and 35 years old. But at about 20 to 25, we were really thinking about time to replant. Part of that is environmental, part of that is the vine health, part of that is marketing, right? You have new clones of Cabernet that are available, new rootstocks, new technologies for irrigation. And it becomes a point where there's just too many opportunities to improve the quality of the grapes that you're growing to not consider replanting them. We'll be pulling out one of our best blocks that goes to Jordan at the end of this year, but we're producing very low tonnage right now. It's not very economic. It's a steep hillside. We'd like to change the aspect a little bit. And our irrigation system, although functional, I can see how we can improve it. And that vineyard will be 25 years this year.
Gotcha. And, you know, we're talking about new technologies and quality for the grapes. Now you're also a certified sustainable wine grower. So can you talk about some of those practices you're employing and how that impacts the grapes and then the wine?
Sure. Sustainability is something that I think we've been certified since 2014. I think there's nothing that defines sustainability more to me than a family that's been producing on the same ground for over 100 years. So if you're talking about the Mazzonis and their, it's block 3, but the grandparents block, they've been producing grapes on that block for over 100 years or around 100 years. That to me is like the definition of sustainability. They are going to do everything they can to protect that land, to put back into the soils what they can to keep them producing and taking care of their family. Both Lisa and Mark have kids. I know that in their dreams, their kids are farming on that same ground and making wine in those same blocks. I have 4 daughters. I think about it all the time. We farm the grapes for today, and we take care of the land for the generations to come. So, you know, a big part of that is sharing that with your children, doing the things that it takes to protect that ground so it'll be there and producing for them in the future. Specifically with certification, you know, there's criteria that you have to follow. You need to be protecting the soils from erosion. You need to be putting back into the soils. You need to be taking care of your employees. All of that is part of sustainability. And so we cover all of those pieces on all the ground that we farm. But really the definition of sustainability is not thinking about tomorrow, but thinking about 30 or 40 or 50 years down the road. And I don't know anybody in this panel that's not thinking about that pretty much day to day. How do we get there and what can we do to protect this lifestyle, this ground, these soils for those future generations?
Love it. And we have some people asking about harvest this year. So is it early? If you could give like a quick little report on what it's been like for you. I know you haven't been getting much sleep lately, so we appreciate you being here.
So harvest is definitely on. Harvest this year came, I thought we were going to be about a week ahead of last year, probably pretty close to our average, historic average. And harvest really came about 10 days prior to that. So most of the whites in Alexander Valley have been finished for the last couple of weeks. We actually finished our last white this morning, but you know, if it was up to me, it should have been picked a week or two earlier. So whites are pretty much done. I would say we're right in the middle of Zinfandels and at the beginning of Merlots at this point. And Cabernets are very close, but we haven't picked any Cabernet. I got my first call this afternoon wanting to schedule our first cab, which coincidentally is in the southern part of Alexander Valley. So naturally, I would think it would be one of our latest because it's the cooler part, but that winery, that site, it's almost always our first. So I would say by mid to end of next week, we'll be very heavily into Merlots and Cabernets and should be done with Zinfandels by Tuesday or Wednesday of next week. So for our business, we get through whites and Zins. We're about 40% done. Cabernet is about 50% of our portfolio. So we still have a long harvest in front of us. And it's, you know, it's definitely going along. We picked last night, we picked today. We'll pick every night and through every day through Sunday. I've got that scheduled right now. So yeah, we're right in the middle of it. There's definitely been a challenging harvest so far, but you know, like I said, with those relationships, we're working with our wineries and the wineries are working with the growers to get the best fruit that we can get.
Great. Jean Pierre, we have a question for you. What are some of your best memories of Alexander Valley?
Well, I'm new to the region because after living at Chez, retiring, we bought a ranch on Choke Hill Road, and we discovered a region. I mean, we knew the region, but I don't know who mentioned, but it is a matter of knowing your neighbor. You know, we have now a lot of friends and a lot of course, vintners, because we are also vintners ourselves. And it is a big family. I mean, you know, I mean, every year they have a big picnic at and more things like that. But I like the spirit of being, knowing your neighbor, doing things, sharing wine, of course, you know, and sharing meals, because we talk about wine and food, but wine and food are nothing without friends around the table and sharing and talking about it. So we love Alexander Valley, even you know, even if today I'm in my garage because we lost our place last year, but I think there's no other place we wanted to be, and we wanted to be here for a long time because we have friends who have been here for, you know, generations, and it's I should not say that now, but it's paradise. I mean,
well, you mentioned a picnic, so I think there was actually a question about the best spot to picnic in Alexander Valley. So maybe a good note to end on would be if we went around and everyone gave their best recommendation for an Alexander Valley picnic.
Well, yeah. I guess I can start. Well, the first thing, I don't want to be too self-promoting, but we do offer picnics at Jordan. We are done for the season, but we do have picnicking on our lawn, which is really great. And then I'm trying to think of where else I would go. It's like if I could go to Brett's mom and dad's house, that would be like my number one pick. But Zialena, I mean, I love the little tasting area and tables behind Zialena where you can go. Lisa can talk about, I don't know, you know, what your picnic policy is, but you're just surrounded by vines when you're in that little spot tucked away, and that's really special too. And as soon as I saw it, I thought I wanted to have a picnic here.
Yeah, so I wasn't going to be self-promoting either, but the truth of the matter is, I mean, our vineyards is my home, and I just love it here. And so, yes, we do have the ability to have picnics at the winery for people who would like to enjoy that. And then, you know, but I enjoy going actually out into the vineyards. And there's a big oak tree kind of over by where we load the grapes on the truck. And that's just a very peaceful spot, surrounded by vines with the views of the hills. Beautiful.
Great. Well, thank you guys all. You have an addition?
I was going to say, I mean, almost all of the wineries in Alexander Valley have a great picnic spot. Hawks Winery on Red Winery has a beautiful location to have a picnic. Rodney Strong's Rockaway property, you know, that's by appointment. It's a gorgeous picnic with a big view. And really, Jordan and Zialena both are totally amazing. So you can go to just about any of the wineries and they've got just a beautiful spot. For our family, yeah, we just go up the hill and plop down the hill anywhere. It's got a great views. There's just very lucky here that you can go just about anywhere in Alexander Valley and find a great spot for picnic.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys all so much for joining us today, and for everyone that tuned in to episode 5 of A Chef's Journey Through Alexander Valley. You can register for future episodes at alexandervalley.org, as well as purchase the wines featured in this episode and others, and also download the chef's recipes. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to see you all. Happy harvest.
Happy harvest.
Yes, happy harvest. Good luck, Brett.
Thank you. Appreciate it.